brightest person you ever knew didn't burn out. They didn't collapse under pressure. They didn't get beaten by life into something smaller than they started. One morning, they simply stopped showing up, and the rest of the world moved on without ever truly understanding why. Think carefully about the sharpest mind you have ever encountered. Maybe it was someone from your university years, wickedly intelligent, unlike anyone else in the room, carrying ideas that operated on a frequency the rest of the class couldn't tune into. You haven't heard from them in years. Or maybe it was a colleague at work, the kind of person who noticed what everyone else walked past without seeing, who solved in 10 minutes a problem that had stumped the entire team for weeks. Then, one day, without warning or explanation, they handed in their resignation, shut down every social media account, disconnected from everything, vanished as though they had never existed. Everyone around them used to say the same things. This one is different. This one is going somewhere. This one will rise further than any of us. And then, silence, absence, a gap in the shape of a brilliant mind where there used to be something extraordinary. So what actually happened? Did they fail? Did the system crack them open and hollow them out? Did they simply surrender when the road got too steep? Carl Jung's excavations into the deepest layers of human psychology reveal a truth that will permanently alter the way you see this. Highly intelligent, deeply perceptive people do not disappear because they were defeated. They disappear because society spent years relentlessly trying to transform them into someone they fundamentally are not. And one day, with complete clarity, they chose to stop performing that role. They walked off the stage, not in defeat, not in shame, in absolute, devastating clarity. And if you have ever felt that same pull yourself, that quiet and persistent ache to retreat, to withdraw, to sever yourself from a world that never quite felt like it was built for you, then Jung's work is speaking directly to you. There is nothing wrong with you. What you are experiencing is the most rational response a genuinely conscious mind can produce when the environment around it insists on penalizing you simply for being exactly who you are. This pattern has written itself across centuries, in field after field, life after life. Jung himself retreated to his legendary tower in Bollingen, building it with his own hands, stone by stone, working in profound and intentional isolation. Gregory Perelman solved one of the most forbidding problems in modern mathematics, turned down a $1 million prize without hesitation, and deleted himself entirely from academic life. Bobby Fischer ruled the chess world with absolute dominance, then sentenced himself to paranoid exile and disappeared. Emily Dickinson crafted poetry that would permanently reshape literary history, almost entirely within the four walls of her bedroom, seeing almost no one, publishing almost nothing during her lifetime. The pattern is undeniable. History's most luminous minds did not claw their way toward social visibility. They quietly, deliberately, walked away from the crowd, every single time. So what are the deep psychological forces that make this withdrawal not merely possible, but, for certain kinds of minds, completely inevitable? Today on Jung Philosophy,
I'm going to walk you through exactly why the most gifted and perceptive people vanish silently from our lives. This is Jung's most unsettling truth about the disappearance of the intellectual, and it will very likely illuminate feelings inside you that you have never been able to fully name. Carl Jung permanently altered the landscape of psychology with his discovery of the collective unconscious. This is a shared mental architecture that every human being inherits at birth, without exception or choice. It consists of beliefs, instincts, and deeply embedded social patterns wired into the mind long before conscious thought begins to form. It is the invisible wall behind every unspoken cultural rule, every mechanism that enforces conformity without ever announcing it is doing so. But what Jung identified, the recognition that altered everything, was this: the overwhelming majority of people never move beyond the perimeter of the collective unconscious. They think what their culture, their
family, and their surroundings have instructed them to think. They desire what advertising has conditioned them to desire. They believe what authority has programmed them to believe. And the most disorienting detail of all, they have absolutely no awareness that any of this is occurring. They are sincerely convinced that their thoughts are original, independent, and entirely their own. In truth, they are replaying pre-installed social recordings over and over, without variation, without examination. Jung called this living in identification with the collective. Everyone wears the same invisible mental uniform. Everyone performs the same unwritten script. But those who carry genuine intelligence naturally overflow the edges of that programming. They scrutinize the inherited certainties others treat as self-evident. They perceive the hollow scaffolding behind the social arrangements everyone else accepts without question. They recognize that what the majority treats as unshakable reality is, in fact, a vast and carefully maintained illusion that holds its shape only because enough people have agreed, without ever being asked, to stop questioning it. Jung called this process of awakening individuation, the journey of becoming your authentic self rather than a cheap replica assembled from surrounding expectations. And this is precisely where the serious problems begin. Because society does not merely dislike individuation, it punishes it, systematically and without mercy. Think about this carefully. When you meet someone physically stronger than you, admiration is natural. When you meet someone considerably wealthier, you might feel quiet envy. But when you encounter someone who is clearly and unmistakably more intellectually capable than you, something entirely different and far darker is triggered in the human brain. Neuroscientific research explains precisely why. When people feel mentally outpaced, the amygdala, the brain's fear and threat processing center, fires like a full-scale emergency alarm. Research conducted at Princeton University confirmed that intellectual superiority activates the same fundamental survival instincts as a direct physical threat. Your depth and perceptiveness light up a genuine danger signal in the nervous system of the person sitting across from you. Not metaphorically, neurologically. Psychologists describe this as the mirror effect. An intelligent, perceptive individual does not simply contribute ideas to a conversation. They simultaneously reflect back to everyone in the room the precise limitations of those people's thinking. Your presence makes the intellectual ordinariness of the surrounding environment visible, and people will go to extraordinary lengths to shield their egos from that exposure. This is why Socrates was executed, why Galileo was imprisoned, why Alan Turing, a man whose work directly saved millions of lives, was driven to his death. Not because their ideas were flawed, because their precision and clarity were too heavy a burden for the people around them to carry. You have lived some version of this. You offer a layered, multidimensional thought, and the entire room goes cold. You gently identify a glaring logical inconsistency in something everyone else accepted without examination, and within moments you are branded the difficult one, the critic, the person who can never simply go along. You try to steer a discussion somewhere deeper, and it gets redirected by a shallow joke within seconds. None of this is coincidence. It is cognitive self-defense. When people encounter a mind that exceeds their capacity, the brain does not work to rise to meet it. It moves immediately to eliminate the source of discomfort. And in that room, you are the source. What ordinary society never grasps about highly intelligent people is this. Every single social interaction requires a sustained and exhausting act of translation. Jung captured this with devastating precision. Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. For a genuinely sharp mind, this is not poetic. It is an accurate description of daily life. You think in systems, in deep structures, in interconnected patterns that span disciplines and time frames. Others around you think in yesterday's news or this morning's office rumors. You speak in nuance, in probability, in shades of meaning that resist collapse into simple statements. They respond with the absolute certainty of people who have never seriously examined their own assumptions. And so, every conversation becomes a translation project. You compress the vivid, multi-layered world inside your mind into flat, drained sentences, stripped of everything that gave them meaning. You cut the nuance. You sand away the depth. You reduce the irreducible to its most basic form, because anything more complex will not land. If Jung philosophy has helped you finally put language to something you have felt for years without being able to name it, subscribe right now and share this video with someone who quietly disappeared from your life. They may need to hear this far more than you realize. And this translation tax does not merely drain your energy in the moment. It slowly dismantles something essential in your mind over time. Because you are not only simplifying what you communicate to others, you are restructuring your own thinking process in order to survive inside the room. The mind operates like a muscle. Force it to function far beneath its actual capacity for long enough, and it begins to erode. Every hour you spend compressing your interior landscape to fit a lower register is, in truth, a measurable contribution to your own intellectual deterioration. Jung understood this danger with complete lucidity. His own exploration of the collective unconscious, his deep immersion in alchemy and synchronicity, was simply too vast for the academic establishment surrounding him. And one day, without drama or announcement, Jung stopped translating himself for an audience never equipped to receive him. He retreated to Bollingen, built his tower by hand, and spent years in near-total isolation. People whispered that he had broken down. In reality, he was doing the precise opposite. He was finally reassembling himself. He was recovering the mind he had been losing piece by piece in the performance of normalcy. Because genuine mental health is not the successful imitation of a shallow society's expectations. Mental health is the refusal to keep performing what a shallow society demands. This is the first and most fundamental reason deeply perceptive people disappear. The translation exhaustion becomes, after enough years, simply impossible to sustain. They step back and ask one honest question: what is this constant performance actually giving me? And the answer, when it arrives with full clarity, is devastating. Nothing. Not a single thing of lasting value. And in that moment, they stop. They step back quietly. They vanish. Not because they lost, but because they finally saw everything clearly enough to understand that continuing was the real loss. Jung gave us another concept that illuminates this disappearance with equal force: the persona. This is the invisible mask you wear when you move through the social world. The polished version of yourself constructed specifically to remain acceptable to the people around you. For most people, the distance between their persona and their actual self is minimal. The mask sits naturally. It doesn't chafe. But for those with higher intelligence and deeper self-awareness, the chasm between the persona society demands and who they genuinely are is bottomless. The character the external world requires, agreeable, uncomplicated, predictable, never genuinely challenging, is so fundamentally opposed to their nature that wearing it becomes an act of ongoing psychological punishment. They swallow the questions pressing hard against the inside of their chest. They keep their sharpest observations entirely to themselves. They pretend not to notice the contradictions that the people around them choose every single day to overlook. Jung wrote that the greatest privilege available to any human being is to become who one truly is. But society issues a different instruction. It demands that you remain safely inside the mold it has already decided you should occupy. Here is what this looks like on an ordinary afternoon. You are sitting in an airless conference room. Someone presents a plan with 5 clearly visible and fatal flaws. Flaws you identified before they finished their opening sentence. You say nothing. Because the last time you raised these issues directly, you were labeled the difficult one, the negative one, the person who can never simply commit and move forward. So you stay quiet. You watch. A plan you know will fail. Receive enthusiastic approval. You can already see exactly how and when it will collapse. And something small and essential inside you goes out. This happens dozens of times every week. Every time you choose the false persona over your actual self, you are choosing counterfeit belonging over the cold clarity of truth. Until the day you look in the mirror and realize you cannot remember who was there before the mask. You wore it so long you have entirely lost the face it was covering. Research from Stanford University found that individuals with an IQ above 130 spend an average of 6 to 8 hours every single day managing their external presentation, suppressing what they observe, performing a version of normalcy that bears only a surface resemblance to what is actually happening inside them. 6 to 8 hours. A full second shift built entirely from pretense. And eventually, the accumulated weight of it becomes impossible to carry. They vanish, not because they failed at the performance, but because they finally recognized what the performance was costing them. Jung introduced one final concept that cuts even deeper: the shadow. The shadow encompasses everything within us that we are unwilling to confront. The denied aspects, the rejected capacities, the parts locked away in darkness because acknowledging them demands more courage than most people can summon. And here is what Jung discovered that makes this directly relevant. Highly intelligent people, without any intention whatsoever, automatically bring the shadow material of the people around them to the surface. The moment you step into a room, something activates in the unconscious of everyone present. Your depth triggers an awareness, however dim and uncomfortable, of their own intellectual shallowness. Your clarity casts light on the habitual assumptions they have never examined. And this initiates what psychology calls shadow projection, a defense mechanism through which people externalize their internal discomfort rather than face it. They redirect the acute pain of their own inadequacy entirely onto you. You're arrogant, they say. You think you're superior. You make people feel small. But here is what is actually happening. You did nothing. Your natural, unperformed presence was sufficient to force a confrontation with something they have spent years avoiding. Have you experienced this? Have you been called arrogant without ever saying a self-aggrandizing word? Have you been accused of looking down on people when you were only trying to understand them? You were simply existing at your natural level, and that alone registered as a threat to the fragile architecture of their self-image. If you are watching this and recognize yourself in what has been described, write, "I am done making myself smaller so that others feel more comfortable," in the comments right now. You have been carrying that truth for a long time. Let it out. There is one more layer that Jung perceived with particular sharpness. If your mind possesses the capacity to read patterns, to see through the surface of events to the mechanisms actually driving them, then human behavior becomes almost entirely predictable to you. And for a sharp, stimulus-seeking mind, predictability is a form of slow cognitive death. Jung wrote, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." Once you have decoded how people fundamentally operate, you cannot undo that knowledge. You know what someone is going to say before they open their mouth. You can map the exact emotional trajectory they will follow in response to any given situation, before it has even developed. Because the majority of people are not genuinely thinking. They are running the social conditioning that was installed in them, replaying it on a loop, unaware that the loop exists. The Dunning-Kruger effect illuminates the dark comedy underneath all of this. People of limited intellectual capacity systematically overestimate their own competence. They believe their most routine comment constitutes a profound and original insight. In reality, it is the same recycled formulation delivered with unearned conviction. Sit through one political debate where every participant is performing their pre-assigned position, and you have already sat through every political debate you will ever witness. Attend one gathering where people trade motivational phrases from pop psychology books. You already know how every future version of that conversation ends. I have had this exact exchange with 23 different people, the perceptive mind registers quietly, and every one of them believed they were saying something new. This recognition corrodes something vital because genuine intelligence craves novelty, unexpected connection, the idea that genuinely destabilizes what was previously settled. And once you have mapped the predictable machinery of average human behavior, ordinary social life has nothing left to offer that function. This is precisely why Jung himself preferred the company of dead philosophers to living colleagues at sophisticated dinner gatherings. Nietzsche could still genuinely surprise him. Kant could still push back against his assumptions in ways he hadn't anticipated. But the decorated professor seated across the table at that elegant evening, Jung already knew every word that was coming. Why invest irreplaceable time in a script you have already memorized when your solitude contains ideas that can still catch you completely off guard? And here, Jung's analysis reaches its most uncompromising conclusion. This society was not constructed to nurture intelligence. It was structured, whether consciously or not, to contain it. Every society needs stability more than truth, obedience more than innovation, comfortable preservation of existing arrangements more than the disorienting growth that comes from confronting what those arrangements actually cost. And real intelligence, genuine perceptiveness, the honest refusal to accept comfortable fictions, is a direct threat to all three. The perceptive person raises the questions a comfortable society would prefer to leave permanently unasked. They see through the pleasant fictions people use to avoid honest self-examination. They unsettle hierarchies with no legitimate foundation for the authority they exercise. And so society develops its countermeasures. It learns to neutralize the disruption without ever acknowledging it is doing so. They will never say plainly, "We are suppressing what you are because it frightens us." Instead, they say, "You don't fit our culture here. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. You overthink everything. Learn to let things go." The message is always identical. Become ordinary or leave. The human brain is hardwired to prefer familiar, reassuring falsehoods over unfamiliar, destabilizing truths, even when the truth is objectively more valuable. The brain's deep instinct toward preserving its existing model always asserts itself. This is why genuinely transformative ideas are invariably ridiculed when they first appear. Why those who moved first were always punished. Why geniuses died in poverty and statues are only erected after they are safely dead and no longer capable of unsettling anyone. Society celebrates intelligence only once that intelligence has permanently stopped posing any threat to the existing arrangement. Jung proved this with his own biography. During his lifetime, the academic psychological establishment branded him a mystical eccentric and pushed him steadily to its margins. Today, the concepts he developed form the foundational architecture of modern psychological understanding. But for those ideas to take the shape they needed, he first had to remove himself from the environment slowly strangling them. He had to build his tower. He had to endure years of isolation that looked, from the outside, like deterioration. What it actually constituted was the most necessary and rigorous intellectual work of his life. Since Jung's death in 1961, every force that drives intelligent people toward withdrawal has been amplified beyond anything he could have imagined. Social media now actively rewards shallowness and reflexive reaction, while structurally penalizing depth and sustained thought. A carefully argued, genuinely nuanced analysis disappears beneath a fragment of content that triggers the right emotional reflex at the right moment. The perceptive person faces an impossible choice every day. Condense your entire interior world into something consumable in 3 seconds, or be ignored completely. Consider what actually achieves mass circulation. Binary declarations requiring no thought. Tribal outrage requiring no examination. Manufactured conflict requiring no resolution. Now consider what genuine intellectual engagement demands. Sustained attention, comfort with ambiguity, patience for complexity that does not simplify on demand. These two worlds are entirely incompatible. A study conducted at MIT across millions of social media posts confirmed that false information spreads at 6 times the velocity of accurate information. Because falsehood is simple. It asks nothing. Truth is complex. It asks something. And every algorithm rewards only what asks nothing. The result is that deeply perceptive people are withdrawing from public intellectual life faster than at any previous point in recorded history. Every significant leap forward in human thought has been made by someone who first removed themselves from the noise of the crowd. Isaac Newton produced his foundational work during a plague year, in complete isolation at his family's estate. Charles Darwin shaped his theory of evolution across more than a decade of quiet, solitary work, well removed from academic institutions. Immanuel Kant lived within a few miles of his birthplace his entire life, and maintained a schedule of such rigid solitude that neighbors set their clocks by his afternoon walk. Emily Dickinson wrote nearly 1,800 poems from her bedroom, almost none published while she lived, almost no visitors permitted. Tesla, whose inventions restructured the physical world, died alone in a hotel room while the society that now invokes his name as shorthand for genius had long since abandoned him. This is not a coincidence confined to famous cases. It is a pattern consistent across every field and every era. Society does not embrace living intelligence. At best, it tolerates it through gritted teeth. Most often, it grinds it down. And only after that intelligence is gone does the same society package it into something profitable. Jung named this recurring cycle the persecution of individuated consciousness by the collective. If what has been described throughout this video maps onto something real in your own history, if you have seen your own experience reflected in these patterns, then you are most likely already in the early stages of your own quiet withdrawal. The signs Jung identified are specific and consistent. You leave social situations not energized, but emptied, as if something essential was taken from you while you were present. You find yourself choosing solitude and your own thoughts over the company of most people, without guilt, without elaborate explanation. You have begun declining invitations without the discomfort of justifying it. You feel a deepening alienation from your professional world, regardless of your competence within it. You contribute less and less to conversations, not because you have less to think, but because the effort of making yourself genuinely understood no longer feels worth it. You are spending more time alone than ever before. And that solitude does not register as loneliness. It registers, unexpectedly, as relief. These are not warning signals. They are the psychological demands of a mind that has finally begun asserting the conditions it actually needs. A significant study published in the British Journal of Psychology found with statistical clarity that individuals with higher measured intelligence report substantially lower life satisfaction the more frequently they socialize. The researchers' conclusion was unambiguous. The more intelligent a person is, the less they gain from ordinary social interaction, and the more it costs them. Your mind operates on a distinct frequency. It requires different stimulation, different depths. The crowded and noisy external world cannot provide what you actually need. The real question is not whether you will eventually step back from the performance. If you are genuinely perceptive and intellectually alive, that withdrawal will come. The question is only when. What actually matters is whether it arrives unconsciously, as a slow erosion you don't understand until it's already happened, or whether you step into it deliberately, with full awareness and clear intention. Jung's answer to that question was unambiguous. A conscious withdrawal, a chosen retreat into the conditions that allow your mind to function at its actual capacity, is one of the most psychologically healthy and ultimately most generative things a human being can undertake. Here is what Jung understood in the most honest passage of his own years of darkness. Deeply perceptive people do not disappear to escape failure. They disappear to escape being made to fail. Society asks them, without pause or apology, to compress their thinking, to hide the full weight of what they perceive, to perform a simplicity that is a lie. Complying with those demands guarantees one specific outcome: never becoming who they were actually here to be. Never making the contribution their mind was quietly built to make. This is why they leave not as a sign of defeat, but as the most authentic expression of interior strength they have ever allowed themselves. They trade the visible, applauded falseness for an invisible, unwitnessed authenticity. And in the precise moment the outer world loses sight of them, they begin, finally, quietly, without ceremony, the only work they were ever truly meant to do. If that pull is growing louder inside you right now, that draw toward silence, toward a life shaped by your actual nature rather than the expectations of people who never understood you, then hear this with as much clarity as you can bring to it. You are not disappearing. You are not failing. You are not coming apart. You are finding, after years spent inside conditions never built to hold you, the space your mind has always needed and deserved. Build your tower. Find the place where the demands of the outside world cannot reach you. Release the connections that have consistently taken more than they have ever returned. Walk away from the environments that reward performance over vision, conformity over genuine contribution, and surface compliance over the kind of deep, honest thinking the world desperately needs but rarely has the courage to ask for. Stop spending yourself trying to explain your interior world to people who have demonstrated, through years of small and accumulated rejections, that they were never truly prepared to receive it. The energy you have been pouring into being understood by the wrong people belongs to your actual work. Reclaim it. Protect it. Let it go only where it can genuinely take root. The world does not need another version of something it already has in abundance. It needs exactly what you have been suppressing, moderating, and concealing in order to be tolerated. It needs the mind you were before the performance started, the depth you had before you learned to disguise it, the clarity you carry but have spent years dimming so others could stay comfortable in the dark. Offering all of that, the full, undiminished, unperformed version of what you actually are, begins with the single act of courage required to first disappear from everything that has been standing between you and it. That disappearance is not the end of your story. It is not a retreat into irrelevance or an admission of defeat. It is, at last, after everything, the beginning of the only story that was ever truly yours.